Hi, I'm Dr. Michelle Pedicola, founder and creator of Secrets of Life and Death. And today I'm going to share with you a really important secret, and it's about dealing with the emotions of grief. If you have had a significant or important relationship loss recently, or maybe it's even been for a year or maybe even longer, listen up, because that relationship or loss of that relationship could still be impacting you, impacting your ability to show up in the world, to develop new relationships, to have successful relationships with your family, to do well in work, and it could even be affecting your health. First of all, let me say I understand. Grief is particularly difficult at this time of year when we're moving into the spring and summer months, when the flowers are blooming and the birds are nesting and you see couples walking together hand in hand. I know I went through this myself, and you can feel frustrated, you can feel out of sort and disconnected, you can feel a great deal of sorrow. Hi, thank you for joining. I'm talking about grief and how to handle grief. You can feel angry. You can even feel resentful of the person who has left you. Now, maybe they left because they actually broke up with you, or they left because they died. And you know what? It doesn't really even matter whether it was voluntary or involuntary. If you're alone on that emotional level, the child inside of you has been abandoned. And so that's pretty upsetting. And oh my gosh, my battery is low. I forgot that part. Okay, so sorry about that. So it's pretty frustrating to deal with grief at this time of year. And you can feel really disconnected from the rest of your community. You can feel like a burden. You may not feel like going out. Of course, right now, we're not going out very much. But then you're stuck at home, and who can you turn to? Maybe the dog or cat? This is probably the worst time to be alone, to reach out. So I want to suggest to you, if you're going through grief or recent loss, to please check out my website, secretsoflifeanddeath.com, because there is a grief guide specifically for you that explains to you in a really charming little digital book about how to handle grief. It has really valuable information, and also you get some follow-up emails that talk more about grief. But if you are at the point where you're ready to move forward and you're having a hard time getting over the grief, then this talk today is for you. I understand, and I want you to understand why grief lingers. As a psychosomatic, social psychological therapist and grief coach, I have worked with people for many years, over 20 years. And what I have found is that there is an there's a biological component to grief that you need to understand. And if you don't understand, you will struggle with your body. Your body has at its disposal powerful resources. And grief is a biological response to the loss of an important relationship. We, human beings, are a social species. We are literally wired to bond with each other. From the very moment we are born, our survival depends upon that mechanism of bonding. Often what happens in childhood is a certain amount of disruption of that bonding mechanism. Maybe your parents had gone through a difficult time in their childhood, and they pass on that dysfunction to you. In my own case, my father lost his mother when he was 10 years old. She literally drove away with his older brother and never returned. That is a very traumatic experience for a 10-year-old. And in the same year, they lost their farm. So those traumatic events have an influence, have an impact on your parents. And then they pass those habits, those ways of dealing with grief on to you. The other thing is that we have a culture that teaches us not to feel our feelings. It is a masculine culture, and unfortunately men are taught to also tamp down their feelings. They're treated as weird or weak if they have their emotions. And so as a result, they learn to develop, hi, thank you for joining, I'm talking about grief. They develop muscular control to hold those emotions in. And they have been holding them in for so long that they aren't even aware. And so it takes major effort to release that. You say, well, why would you want to release that emotion? I mean, I've got it in control. Well, here's the thing. They control their experiences as a child, but then something happens in their lives, which is going to happen. It's part of life that you're going to lose a relationship or many relationships, particularly a significant partnership relationship. And when that happens, the emotions can be so overwhelming that you literally feel like you're going to die. I had a client in one of my grief groups, a man, and he felt like he wanted to commit suicide. He was actually thinking about committing suicide because he was so overwhelmed by the emotions. And they're really horrible. Grief is not comfortable. You feel like you are in the dragon pit. The sorrow can go on and on. You can't stop weeping. You're not good company for anybody. It hurts. Your heart literally hurts. And then you go through bouts of anger, just searing anger, because you say, why me? Why does this have to happen to me? Now, when I lost my husband, my first husband, many years ago, I totally tamped down my feelings. I got involved with another relationship right away. And it was probably a couple of years later when I was involved in a relationship and it broke up that I finally grieved, because the impact of that second loss, not that I loved that person more than my husband, but it broke me open, partly because I was doing a certain amount of work. So here you are struggling with these emotions, and you've been taught by your culture not to release them. But the body wants you to do something. And you're like, well, what am I supposed to do? Well, the body wants you to rebond. And so, for example, in other species like the elephant, elephants grieve, and the elephants are a herd animal, as we are herd animals as well. But they have an actual living community that supports its other members, so that when a mother elephant loses her baby or the baby loses its mother, the herd literally comes in and takes over and absorbs that lost soul into their herd. That doesn't happen in this current social and cultural climate. Right now, we do not have very integrated communities. We live in small, what they call nuclear communities of a husband and wife and maybe children. And maybe there's a little bit of an extension. Maybe you have a sister, or maybe your mother is still alive, or maybe not. And what do? You need that communal support, but you don't have it. And you are told by your very own culture to get over it. And there it is, it's lingering. Plus, you have never been taught the tools for releasing it. And I've had clients come to me and they say, oh, but I have cried and I've cried and I've cried. And that actually is not the way to release the emotions. We think it is, but it isn't. It actually is a way, it's a habit that re-triggers the grief over and over again. And I talk about that more in my life makeover challenge, which I'm going to tell you about a little bit more in the future, is how the body works and how the mind works together to keep you stuck in that grief. So when I work with my clients, I actually teach them a technique that releases that emotional energy in 2 minutes or less. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? And when you develop that hygiene, you can actually not only handle your current grief. I had a client come to me. She had been grieving the loss of her husband for 20 years. Actively grieving, like tears pouring out of her eyes because she had lost the love of her life. And every time she saw her son, her adult son, she would start crying because, of course, he reminded her of her husband. And she saw her husband as the person who had saved her. What I find is that when that emotion lingers, when it does not resolve itself, very often there is emotional trauma in childhood. And indeed, in this case, with this woman, her father left her mother, and her mother was irresponsible. And so this child, at the age of 10, literally had to take responsibility for her and her sister. She would go out in the middle of the night to pull her mother out of bars, to bring her home so that they had some kind of safety. So when she met her husband literally promised to take care of her. What people don't understand is that we cannot expect somebody to be everything for us. Yes, when we're babies, our parents are supposed to be everything. But when we're adults and we haven't had that need met, we literally suck the energy out of the person that we're living with. And I have seen this over and over again because I worked with people around grief and loss, partner loss, for 20 years, and I totally understand the dynamic. And it's not your fault, but you can change it. So therefore, I invite you to sign up for my 5-day makeover challenge to find out what it is in your life that is holding you back from releasing your grief. And you can get access to the 5-day makeover challenge by going to my website, secondchancesecrets.com. Second Chance Secrets, that's plural, secrets.com. No spaces in between. And on the very first page, if you're on your phone, scroll down a little bit, you'll see a form, fill it out, and you will get access to this full Second Chance Secret training program. It's got 5 days of trainings, 4 question and answer sessions, and literally has worksheets. They're not very long. Some of the trainings are very short, even 3 minutes. And you can start to understand where you're holding back and where you're stuck so that you can begin to move forward. And it ends with a webinar that puts it all together. So if you would like to have help with your issue of grief and loss, please sign up for the Makeover Challenge and see where you need to work on your issues. So what's the effect of not dealing with this? I told you about the one client who had been grieving the loss of her partner for 20 years and literally affecting the relationship with her son. And she had recently moved to the Bay Area and was seeing her son and his fiancé a lot. And she was imposing her neediness on him. And so she realized that she needed to have this resolved. And she had gone to see psychotherapists, psychoanalysts, counselors, grief coaches. And working with me, we actually got it handled, the grieving part, within the first month. And then the next few months, I helped her to step into a more exciting life, which was what her son had been trying to do for a long time. But if you think that's long, I worked with another client who came to me in her 80s because she was having trouble with relationships with her daughters. Why? Because many years before, not too long after the loss of her husband, she got involved with a young man. Well, she was still young back then too, because it was a long time ago. And he wanted her all to himself, and she wanted to be needed. And she broke her relationships with her daughters. And so she was not connected with her daughters and their children. So now, at the ripe age of 80, she wants to develop a relationship, and yet she is overwhelmed with guilt. And so that's what we worked on. But can you imagine all those years? Because she never dealt with the first loss, which was the loss of her husband. And actually, there were earlier losses than that. And that's my specialty. That's what I work with people, is those early childhood traumas and wounds. But don't worry, I don't make you go back there. We only go back there as it shows up. I'm all about empowering you to heal your emotional wounds and get results fast. You don't want to wait. My own story, I did not deal with the emotions I had around the disconnection, the disbonding with my father when I was 2 years old. And this affected my relationships. This affected my work life for 48 years. Talk about a long time. Can I get upset at my clients? No way. I was clueless. I had no idea I was doing that. I was being the good girl. I was being appropriate. And I didn't understand that because I was what you call a people pleaser and I was putting all my energy out into the world to have them decide whether I was good enough or not. And this is often at the ground zero of our grief and loss, is that the loss feels somehow like we're not good enough, or maybe we feel victimized. And those are the kind of perspectives that cause us to hold on to the grief, to not let it release. Now, another reason why people hold on to the grief, and I ran into this a lot in my grief groups, is the belief that if you stop grieving, you will lose connection with the person that you lost. And if you've lost them to death, this is a very powerful way of connecting. Well, I teach my clients how to release the emotions of grief and retain the connection and bring it into your future so that you don't lose the person. I totally understand that. You know, I actually am still in connection and contact with my first husband, who's going through a really rough patch right now because he just lost his brother. So, but that's another story. So one of the reasons we hold on to grief is that we're afraid that we're going to lose connection. And that's the work I do, is I teach you how you don't have to lose connection. Now, another reason is habit. If it's been your habit to repress your feelings, you may not even realize that you're doing it until it just bursts out, oftentimes in the form of anger. And that's a problem because it affects your work relationships. It affects your relationships with new people. Maybe you're trying to get into a new relationship and they say something that triggers you and the anger comes out. So the final thing I want to say to you is that it does take time, because you're literally rebuilding the neural networks in your brain, and you're rebuilding the emotional habits that you have. And of course, the releasing the emotions is probably the easiest thing that I can help you with. But rebuilding the other part, it's like you are going to create a whole new life. You're going to step into a whole new self. So if you would like to know more, please go ahead and check out my website, secondchancesecrets.com. There's a lot of information. I tell you all about the various programs that I have, and I have various levels that you can look at. And go ahead and check out the makeover challenge, the 5-day makeover challenge, and get yourself started on changing your life. Oh, one more thing. I want to talk to you about health. I had mentioned that grief can affect your health. I had one client who was not willing to give up her grief and literally had accidents. She broke her wrist, she broke her ankle, she broke her shoulder because she was not able to release the emotions. So I work now much faster to ensure that that doesn't happen. And I understand that there is a resistance, there is a fear that goes all the way back to childhood. If you've been taught to tamp down your emotions for safety's sake, or because it hasn't been acknowledged and there's fear, we work through that fear. The cool thing is that the way in which I work with emotions is probably the safest way to release your emotions. Although I recently was working with a client and there is resistance, but never fear, I can get you through that. So let me see if there's anything else I want to tell you about. Oh, so I think I was saying a little bit about the biology of grief. There's also the biography. I also mentioned culture, is that the way in which we're brought up in our culture is we're taught to repress our feelings, but also the specific experiences that we have in our own life impact us as well. And of course, I gave you the example of the woman who had been grieving the loss of her husband for almost 60 years, and the other woman who had grieved the loss of her husband for 20 years. Now, you don't want to go that long. You do not want to wait for 48 years like I did until you step into your power. And here's the final thing. Grief holds you back from stepping into your power because you're always in this place of dis-ease and discomfort and not feeling good enough and not feeling valuable and not feeling worthy and feeling out of sorts. And you rob yourself of love, and you rob yourself of success, and you even rob your health, because those that emotional energy, if you're tapping it down, if you're holding it in, it is going to actually affect your health, because it takes muscular energy to hold your emotions down. And over time, that restriction and constriction reduces the flow of fluids and actually the flow of energy. That's all I have for today. Please reach out to me. Sign up at secondchancesecrets.com for your copy of the 5-day makeover challenge. And if you want to reach out to me, it's at www.meetwithdrmichelle.com. That's it for today. Be well and be brilliant.